right.
Hello.
Hello. We're checking in with all the good people out there in the world of tone. We welcome you to another episode of Chairmen of the Boards. And today, as you might have guessed, we're talking about the evolution of the Pedalboard power supply. And boy, have there been some changes since things first emerged. I guess the Pedal Power 1, if I'm not mistaken, and somebody can correct me on this, I think it came out in the late 90s. And that was kind of revolutionary for the time. But before we get into all of this evolution and talk about power supplies and maybe talk a little bit about things that have changed for the better, I think this is one of those situations where it's not like vintage pedals where people say, well, you know, it was really the best if you got X, Y, and Z pedal back in 97 and now they're worse. I think it's one of those situations where everything has gotten appreciably better, smaller, more efficient. I just want to remind folks that are listening out there that we have not only an amazing Facebook group full of pedalboard enthusiasts just like you, we also have a masterclass that is available on Teachable and is 50% off, halfway to free, if you want to think about it that way. And it details how to assemble your pedals in the proper order to optimize tone based on our experiences as rig builders. You can check that out. We're going to have that in the description if you want to see it. There's also one about how to order your effects when you're using an ampless rig. So you have both choices. You have amped and ampless. There's something for everybody. And with the holiday season right around the corner, no better time than to gift the person that you love a great masterclass on signal paths. Even the wife will love it, I think. It's good, clean fun for the whole family. And with that out of the way, let's talk power supplies. I want to know first, Grant, which brand of power supply did you lose your rig building power supply virginity to?
PP2 Plus. I mean,
Woo!
what better power supply?
Boy.
I was treated well. I was treated nicely, and but a funny story with this,
There was no Sade playing while you installed it.
no. I brought that power supply with me to Australia with a step down transformer.
Right. Because you got 230. You got to bring it down to 120. Yep.
And then one of the youth kids at the time borrowed my pedal board, plugged it straight in, and my first power, my PP2 Plus, was never to be heard of again. This was at the time where I was experimenting a lot with, true bypass loopers and just seeing who I was as a guitar player. I took the enclosure of the PP2 Plus and I turned it into a 3-channel loop strip.
Wow.
And so it lived to see another day after it popped. And it was completely fried. Like there's no saving it after that, at least at that point in my skill set. So I just gutted it and turned it into a true bypass strip, and it worked great. So it lived a second life. It evolved in context of the conversation today. So that was my number one.
Yeah.
My very first
On Grant's power supply body count. That was one. All right, and you, Brian?
On my very first power supply, it was actually the T-Rex Chameleon.
Oh,
the green
okay.
one?
Very
green
European,
one. Yeah.
very exotic.
Yeah.
Excuse us.
Chameleon for Omilion.
Ooh, I think they're
Yeah.
they're from Denmark, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. It was a
Wow.
Guitar Center convincing. I was in the buy pedal power. I was actually in the buy one, and the guy was like, "No, you want this one?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, sure," because I want that massively bright green power supply on my board. And I will say, I do have to back it up. The Chameleon actually was my second power supply. I have to take that back. My very first was the SKB power supply that was built into the SKB board.
Brian.
So yeah.
We all had to start somewhere, and as I've always said, there are those of us that have had tone beer goggles, and we sometimes believe our rigs are 10s.
Yep.
And It's okay,
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of. I think my first power supply also. I think Brian was going beyond what he needed to say as far as his
Overshare.
admission of what he used, because technically those SKBs were not standalone power supplies. They were like integrated with pedal boards, and I believe I had a Furman version of basically that same thing. So
Was that the plastic molded pedal board with the carpet and the Furman up the back with the mains in it?
And
Is
they
that
used the eighth inch jacks on it.
Yes.
Yeah, and none of it was isolated. I believe I did have that, and then I did get a Pedal Power 2, not the Plus. And I remember at that time I had bought a pedal train, which was like very expensive. This is in the early days of pedal train. This is before they had any sort of routing ability. Like there was nothing routed for the power supply, in other words. I believe they had brackets, but I think you had to like drill your own. Actually, they may not even have had brackets. That sounds ambitious. I don't think they had even brackets. I think what people were doing was taking like L brackets, and they were hammering them flat. And then they were using those to attach to the. Or actually, no, they wouldn't have hammered them flat. They would have left them as L brackets because of where the screws are. Those, I guess they were metal screws that were on there, and they would have used longer metal screws with a washer, and they would have installed those L brackets and then screwed them into the underside of the pedal train. But then the other problem is that you had no holes for IECs. And so then you had to drill the holes to have your access points for the courtesy out and for the IEC. So I remember at that time I was in college, or maybe I was in high school, and I didn't know my dad didn't have any of that sort of stuff, those sorts of power tools. So I remember having to take it to one of my friend's dads that had the right bits, for and it's like pretty soft aluminum on those pedal trains. Yeah. But you had to still have a bit. It was pretty wide. It was, I think, 1.5 inches or something like that. It was a pretty wide bit.
Step bit, yeah.
Yeah. So I remember it being. I don't think he actually used a step bit. Although that would have been that would have been, but 1.5 inch step bit is pretty huge. That's
it is.
But anyway, yeah, I remember doing all that, and it was a Pedal Power 2, not the Plus. I don't think the Plus had come out yet. And I worked with a lot of Pedal Power ones because people had them, but Pedal Power 2 was my first real standalone power supply. I remember wanting a DC brick at one time, and those are also not isolated, because I saw that like John Mayer was using one at the time, and I was like, well, if he uses it, then it must be great. But this is all to say that things have changed dramatically since those days. And not only do we have the Pedal Power 1 and the Pedal Power 2 and the Pedal Power 2 Plus, the T-Rex folks were also in the game sort of around the time of the Pedal Power 2, and they had multiple different options available. They were always a little bit strange to me, though. I don't know if you guys remember this, and this could have been how yours was, Brian, where it actually had the AC attached to it, like it couldn't be removed. Some of the T-Rex supplies didn't have a removable IEC. It was hardwired into the actual enclosure. I don't know if that's
mine was actually, it was a socket on the side, so it wasn't hardwired. So it was definitely a newer version. But yeah, it was. I think my SKB board was like that or something, like because I had two different style SKB boards.
Yeah.
One where the power was literally wired to it, another one where the power jack was like the socket was on top or the side or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember those, and then I remember that the first big. So I remember Pedal Power 1, Pedal Power 2, the brick was around. And then I remember when Voodoo Labs started to address higher current stuff. Because it used to be kind of like you had that, what was it, 6, loop 6, or output 6 or 5 and 6 on the Pedal Power 2. Those are the ones where you could go to unregulated, and then you could power like a DL4 and stuff like that. But as stuff like the Eventide time factor and pitch factor and mod factor came out, that started to be a challenge to be able to use a lot of those. Then they started coming out with the Pedal Power ISO 5, I think was the first of their sort of like smaller ones. Then the digital, then the 4x4, then the Mondo. These are all linear supplies, by the way, at this point. And then I remember them having some competition from somebody who was an ex-Voodoo Lab employee that started a company called Decibel 11. Do you remember this company, Decibel 11?
We used them a decent amount.
They looked sort of similar to a Voodoo Lab, like in terms of how it was laid out, but had kind of this I don't know, bizarre looking kind of paint job that was not very like, I don't know, discreet or industrial looking. But they were kind of a similar power supply. There was also another one, Barkisberry. BBE used to make one that was literally the same enclosure as the Voodoo Lab pedal power called the Supercharger. And it was, if you look that up online, you'll see Supercharger. It looks exactly the same as a Pedal Power 2. The enclosure is identical.
Interesting. I didn't
I'm
know
just
that.
gonna put it here in the chat.
The first
for people
article that
are,
comes up is on Reddit when I search this. Don't buy the BVE Supercharger at our guitar pedals. I've actually never seen this on a rig. I think I've seen a photo now that I see pictures of it. But
I'm just putting here. Here's a little Amazon image that I just put into the chat here. It was everything about it was the same. It was literally like the enclosure, the radius of the bends, everything about it was the same. And that was around. Again, these are all linear supplies. And then I think the first player that you really saw getting into switch mode power. Oh, there was another one that was really popular amongst the tone pervs. That was called the Berkey Flatliner. You ever heard of that?
Nope.
No.
I think that's what it's called. Berkey. Is it Flatliner? Yep, Flatliner.
Is that one on DOA?
All right, check this out. This thing was huge. It was so big. Let me see if I can find a picture of it here. It was brutal. Oh man, and it was so heavy.
Gigantic.
Yeah, it was so heavy. Imagine like two Pedal Power, not quite as big as Mono. Let's say Pedal Power 4x4s, but stacked on top of each other. That's how big it was.
It's big.
I just put a link into the chat. If you're listening, you can still head over to the chat after the fact, even after this is aired, and you can look at links that we've posted. You can just say display chat, and it'll show it to you. But it was kind of this greenish black, and boy, that thing, I know a lot of people swore by it. It was huge. So I remember that one. They also made a little bit smaller one. What's that?
I saw one I was Googling it, the Harley Benton, which I've had zero.
I've never seen. I don't think that was contemporary to this stuff. This is kind of like early 2000s. Early to mid 2000s.
Yeah, I've never seen it. I've heard people actually ask about it, and I was like, no, I've never. So I saw that one. I was like, I've heard the name a few times, but no, that's crazy.
Yeah. So the first though that I thought really was groundbreaking in our industry that I actually don't think gets enough credit for its ingenuity in our guitar space is the G Lab power supply, the PB1. I'm going to put that in the chat here as well. This was the first switch mode power supply that I ever saw commercially available in the guitar world. And they were really smart in the way that they did this. I don't know if there's any, I guess there's no photos of the bottom of it. But basically what they did is I think likely to work around some of the EU regulations for CE. You see like CE on the bottom and Underwriters Lab stuff. is they basically found a power supply, like a main supply, that was switch mode that they installed into this enclosure. So imagine you found basically something that was the shape of a computer charger and that would work for audio. And they figured out how to get all of that to fit into this box. And by way of buying something that had already done all of the approvals, they were able to sort of piggyback that onto their stuff, because everything that they were doing after that was all low voltage. It wasn't coming in at AC anymore. It was already, being converted to DC.
Yeah.
And if you looked at the bottom of it, you could actually see like the physical module, that was like the supply. And so it was like a really smart workaround. I'm guessing that this is what they've done, and I think I've spoken to a couple of other people that sort of validated that was plausible. But what a smart way to sort of check all those boxes that ordinarily would have cost tens of thousands of dollars. And by the way, most companies are not doing that. They're not getting UL approval on their power supply. Some are, but a lot of them are taking a risk, I guess. But boy, were these really, really great power supplies. The only issue that you would have with them is that they only did 9 volts. So you had some
I
issues.
couldn't find that anywhere here on the spec sheet. Yeah, 9 volts only.
Yeah, it only does 9 volts. You had, I believe it was 8 outputs. But I think all of them, if I'm not mistaken, did at least a few hundred milliamps. I'm trying to see if it says on the, because basically the enclosure is super industrial looking. It's kind of like all it tells you on the front are like the facts of the power supply in like a block diagram of it. It's very, I think they're Polish, and it has, some of that.
Yeah, barely. I can't even see the milliamps in the manual.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can. It looks like it's 350 per output. 350 per output.
Yeah.
But at the time, there really wasn't that many devices that weren't compatible with it. There weren't a whole lot. There were some, obviously, that would go 18, and you could still do 18 with a voltage doubler cable here. But this thing was so great because you no longer had to worry about, one, going to another country and not having your pedalboard work or having to use a step up or step down. The other thing is that it had much higher current per output than anything else that was out there at the time. And so you could very easily power stuff. And you could also, the other big benefit is that it was switch mode. And so you could put stuff under it and you wouldn't have this noise issue. And I think that this is a good time maybe where one of you could take over and sort of enlighten the listener out there around the big distinctions between switch mode power supplies and linear power supplies, and why one may be preferable to another in the conditions that we find ourselves in today's pedalboard. Brian or Grant?
Go ahead, Grant. Take it away.
Correct me where I'm wrong here on my limited understanding, but linear power supplies essentially use transformers, which are big, they're heavy, and they have a magnetic field around them that will induce noise into surrounding audio lines and all, especially if the enclosure is not properly isolating that signal or blocking noise. Whereas a switch mode is kind of like a digital switching control that turns AC into DC, and it's also a bit of the older ones get a really bad rap because a lot of times people would use switch mode or associate switch mode power supplies that were not designed for audio, use them with audio, and get huge noise issues. And when you have a purpose-built switch mode supply for audio, all the filtering is in there. It's designed to not induce noise into surrounding lines and be clean, all this. Now you have the ability to have high current outlets per outlet without a gigantic transformer. And so you can get something like, well, we're about to talk about some of these power supplies that are super lightweight, very thin. The biggest constraint on a lot of these switch mode supplies is actually the size of the IEC jack that you need to fit
Yeah.
into an enclosure or fully remove, so you can kind of get a smaller connection in there. The exterior hardware is now one of the limitations, and so you can just get these specs like some of the things that some of these companies are coming out with now, where previously it would be awesome on a linear supply to see 350, maybe even 400. It's like, whoa, that's a high current outlet. And now we're able to get 2 amps, 2,000 milliamps or up. And so it's pretty cool to see what's now doable. And I don't know why my screen just gave me a thumbs up, but just want to say big thumbs up to all of you guys. So that would be my limited understanding. You guys can correct or adjust anything I just said, but basically linear, big, heavy, noisy. Switch mode, if filtered well, is small, lightweight, quiet with superior specs. Those are kind of the big distinctions.
Brian, anything to add?
No, that's I would say the same thing. I'm in the same boat as Grant when it comes to linear and switch mode, but I definitely think like I have always thought, a heavier transformer, a bigger enclosure, more bulkier when it comes down to it. And correct me if I'm wrong, the pedal power 1s and 2s, like there's a switch on the back, like to actually change the voltage. So that is it.
Not the input voltage. They had some of them. They had dip
No.
switches underneath where you could.
Yeah.
I don't know if on the 1, but definitely the 2 and 2 plus, where you could change different features of the outputs. But you never had any.
No. I meant the one where if it was for AC inputs. It was like
Old
going
Cioks
They never had
had
any.
some
You had
of
to buy.
that.
You had to buy a
Was it?
separate supply for each of the Voodoo Lab ones.
I am blanking on
On
that.
your
all of
on your
them had
T-Rex
switches.
one, it would have had that. Your T-Rex one had
Yeah.
one that would go from 120 to 230, I think.
Yeah.
But the Voodoo Lab never had that.
The Voodoo I've never. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I
Uh-huh.
do remember on my T-Rex. I guess maybe I thought maybe that's where it's been so long. Yeah, I remember the pedal powers didn't, but it was probably. Oh, I'm thinking of the little panel underneath to do the voltage change. That's why I was
Yeah.
thinking Voodoo. But yeah, no, my T-Rex definitely had that. But yeah, no,
Yeah.
bigger, bulkier. That's the way I think, especially because like you get like newer power supplies. Like I have a box of them here, like the Canvas series from Walrus. Like those are obviously in the newer game of power supplies, but I guess that's where they get away with the smaller enclosures, just because the transformer and the IEC, all that not transformer, the IEC and all that circuit is in the little extension brick, like the Ojai and stuff, which is super handy.
Well, and I think the only correction I would make is it's not that they don't have any transformers in them. It's that they're not using these big R-core or C-core like toroid transformers that are sort of what makes up the line share of the spacing. Like they have to set their height basically based on those transformers, and then they also have to deal with heat that's associated with those transformers, and as the demands for power supplies increased in terms of number of outputs, the current per output, the voltage per output, this also then increased the transformer size, which increased the size of the enclosure that it needed to be in, because they also had to now start doing things to deal with the additional heat that was generated by the increased demands for current. And this had a lot of them move. If you look at the Pedal Power 2, I can't remember how many. It has some heat sinks inside of it because it's using a steel enclosure, which is really great for the magnetic field shielding, but it's not great for heat dissipation, so they had separate heat sinks that were on the board. When they moved to the bigger supplies like the 4x4 and the Mondo, they were relying on the enclosure to become part of the heat sink because they used aluminum. But that caused a problem where now the devices near it are more susceptible to that magnetic field, and so that was kind of the trade-off. And I think that this was relatively mitigated. Like a lot of people who said that they didn't have noise issues with using these power supplies, because I've done lots of videos, and I think you guys have too, where we've talked about the consequences of putting a linear power supply directly below other pedals like you would on a pedal train or some of the other devices that allow you to hide the supply. When you do that, you're putting the effects in the magnetic field, and in many cases, you'll sort of have an underlying hum that just can never be gotten rid of, even when it's a clean amp, and it's worse when it's a dirtier, higher gain amp. In rig builds like you would see from like LA Sound Design, for example, you'll notice he uses Voodoo Lab pedal power supplies even to this day, but he puts them all the way in a corner, and so that there's never anything stacked on top of it, and there's really nothing like too close to it, and that's because you can get away with using them if you observe that practice. It just means that the footprint of the pedal board has to be somewhat larger because you have to accommodate putting something far away from other things, where you can't just bury it or have it under a riser or something like that, because it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work from a noise standpoint. And that became very obvious, especially to me in the rig builds that I was doing at the point where we were beginning to use those higher current supplies and trying to build up. It just didn't work because we would just have so much noise from the supply that we couldn't get rid of it. And that's where the G Lab just was so fundamentally better than everything else, because it offered that option.
Mm-hmm. The other irony here is the more current you pull in these higher current supplies, the bigger this field gets, and the more noise is then added. It's like the more pedals you plug in, the worse the noise is going to get. And so it's it's one of those, like, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't type thing. It doesn't work well, and it's one of those things. Now you kind of look at rig building and what's required and what we used to have to put up with as far as power goes. Mm-hmm. And it's like, man, I can't believe we had to do that. Like, there was just a lot to consider. There was a lot less demand as far as current draw and specs and all this. But I just couldn't imagine going back. I just can't imagine relying on linear power supplies these days. It would just cause so many issues. A big one being current draw and weight, because there's just a lot of requirements in these areries. So I'm very grateful for the current power supplies that we have.
I remember the first time picking up a Zuma and being like, God, this feels like nothing. And if you compare a Zuma to a Pedal Power 2, which are roughly the same size, there's a pretty significant difference in how much they weigh. And one other thing I would say, this in Grant's synopsis, is that in the vacuum, a linear supply is technically better than a switch mode in terms of noise. And there's a lot of people that give that pushback, especially when I've made videos. They say, well, a linear supply actually is better and can be made lower noise. And that is true. It is possible to be made that way. However, if that is looking at it in an isolated context, to say, if we are looking at instrumentation and we're seeing the noise floor of these respective devices, yes, the linear supply will be quieter. Is that a volume or at a frequency that the human ear can hear? That's the second part that kind of gets omitted from that argument, which is no, because switch mode is using high frequency as part of the way that the actual device is working in providing this power. Now, if they are designing it in such a way where all of that the switching is happening outside of the audio range of what the human ear can hear, then it's sort of irrelevant whether the linear supply is better or worse. What's relevant is what is actually functional in the product itself. And so where it is true that linear power supplies would be quieter in a vacuum, if the switch mode is designed for audio applications, there isn't a benefit, or the any benefit that the linear supply has is sort of negated by the fact that it adds a tremendous amount more weight, it adds a tremendous amount more size, and you have to be very careful about where it is located on the pedal board, whereas like those are all sort of invisible now once you switch to the switch mode stuff. So that I think that's an important distinction to make. Any other things that we want to say about this kind of discussion before we maybe move on to sort of the next evolution, and then maybe get into some more of the contemporary supplies that we really like, and kind of detail some of that information?
I think the only other thing that sticks out about linear supplies is when I used to live in Australia, we'd have touring acts come through, and I was part of church over there, and it was baffling to me. I mean, it just is what it is at the time, but you would have to supply people at the venue or the stadium or whatever it is. You would have to supply them with 120 volt lines and with 240 volt lines just so they could power their pedal board and then power backline with amps at 240. And like this just isn't even a thing anymore. Like now, you with these modern supplies we're about to talk about, you can just, as we all know, you just plug them in. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. Everything is sorted and your pedal board works, and you don't even have to think about blowing up.
Just
your power
maybe the
supply.
cable that connects to the wall, though. Sometimes people don't travel with this.
Venues have IEC cables of all
Right.
types, no matter where you go. You know, and if not, go find a printer in the office and steal their printer
Literally.
cable. But yeah, I just think it's another one of those things that we just don't need to worry about anymore. And I've slept a lot better because of it. I'm a well-rested man because of these issues that no longer exist. So I think there's even just that benefit of I can just plug in my pedal board and that's it. I don't have to fiddle with the switch on the back. I don't have to find a step-down transformer. I don't have to A, B, and C. It's pretty awesome. And of course, like a lot of people say, that doesn't matter to me. I don't travel. And then you have to travel. If something comes up where you now have to travel, it's like, well, what am I going to do about my power supply? So this stuff it's just not an issue anymore, which is great.
No, I same boat. I think it's handy when you don't have to have extra gear with you or something you don't have to worry about, because I mean, it's one less question a lot of times that has to be asked, which I've had people who like tour and will go overseas and stuff, like they would be like, oh yeah, I had to write a note on the top of my pedal board, like make sure to flip this switch on the power supply before plugging in, because this, like, to whoever their stagehand was that was plugging it in. So like it just takes a weight off of the musician, as well as whoever the tech or stagehand, whoever it is that's doing it, as well as you just got less stuff to have to worry about. I do want to mention, if I'm looking down at my phone, I'm just checking on my wife to make sure she's not in labor. So if you see me looking down at my
Priorities,
phone,
Brian.
I have
Do we have a name yet for baby Omilion, or is it still a secret? Don't.
We don't. We have a couple ideas. The thing is this: if he would have been a girl, we would have had 30 or 40 names. But because
that's too many.
The boy. Well, yeah, it would have been taken forever at like award ceremonies for her to call her name. No, yeah, no, we have a couple names. We just haven't set on it yet. It was the same thing with our last two kids. We didn't know until they were born, and we're like, oh yeah, that name fits them best. So, but I was checking.
So if you have any name suggestions, put those in the chat for baby Omilion.
I think it's gonna be Switch Mode. Just kidding.
Switch Mode. Yep.
My son Switch.
Or just Voodoo.
No, I think just Voodoo.
Voodoo Omilion.
Controversial name.
Voodoo Mama Juju. No, I would Grant, you said everything perfectly. I think it just takes off less hassle too, I think, from the perspective of the musician and the tech. So I also will sleep better at night knowing that we don't have to deal with those as much. I mean, I don't.
You'll sleep better for the next maybe 24 hours, and
and then once Cioks Omilion is here,
Cioks.
Yeah.
I will legit be SOL on that. Like SOL Cioks.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that's until they get their 6th output on the power supply there.
Thank you.
then you'll have
Brian's
DC
outputs
7
might be cut
Omilion.
off after this one.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
the next kind of big seismic shift, I think, in the switch mode, and I guess in this case it's technically more of a hybrid, I think, was the True Tone CS12 and CS7, and also the Strymon Zuma, I think, shortly on the heels of that, and then the Ojai. Those were kind of the next big, I think.
I think we're forgetting one.
Okay, what are we
But you're
forgetting?
not going to like it.
Okay, go.
True
I'm
Tone?
looking up years here. In 2015-ish, Gig Rig released their modular power system.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Is
and
this- this is
that
kind
was
of in that
also
time
also
area,
switch
right?
mode. I
Yep.
believe that was also switch
But
mode.
controversial.
Yeah, and I guess also if we're being fair, Cioks also had released power supplies in kind of, I don't know when the Cioks came
I was just
out,
looking
or
that
when there was one that was pink and quite controversial. I don't know if we can say that in a
What was it called?
unless we're
again?
in 18
2011
plus.
was the chocolate.
Chocolate. What about like their DC10, and they had like a
That was
bunch of
before.
other.
They had the Atom, the DC10, early 2010s, it says here, for the DC10.
Yeah, so that was kind of right around that time that the Voodoo Lab ISO 5 digital pedal power 4x4 Mondo
Yeah.
came out. It was right around that time. I remember those being good. They were linear, but they were good, and they were steel, so at least you had some shielding, and they were still that super low profile Cioks format, which is always great. I remember using one. The first Cioks supply I ever used was for John Schofield on a rig I
Nice.
built for him. And
Do you remember your initial thoughts on the RCA outlets?
I remember thinking, well, I knew that they were a better connection than the 2.1 millimeter, but I was just sort of like, well, and I had the parts, I remember, because I still had supplies for like fixing my amps, and I have a bunch of old Fenders that utilize RCA connections on the back of the amps. So I had a bunch of RCA connectors already. So it wasn't like it was a stretch. It was kind of just like, I remember my biggest gripe with them. There was two gripes I had. One was the location of the IEC, which for some is still a gripe, I think.
I would
And
agree.
then the second was, and I think it was worse in the old days because they almost had like a way, like this thing you had to like feed it through that kind of acted as a strain relief. And so you kind of had this weird sort of like recessed entry to the IEC, and there was sort of a weird like little feed through like tab that you would use. Anyway.
And some were the Mickey Mouse connection.
Yes,
It wasn't
yeah.
IEC.
Oh,
That
right.
also drove
Or
me
it was
crazy.
was the 3-barrel version. Yeah, I
Ugh.
remember that.
I hated those.
Yeah, I remember that.
This
And-
is a rare. This is a rare sighting right now. We are speaking negatively about Cioks. I mean, that's
well,
hold
again,
on to
I
it.
thought it
Still
was
great.
better than it was probably better than the offerings at the time that were available.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. The other thing I didn't like about it was, so we talked about the IEC entry. There was another thing I didn't like about it. I don't. Yeah. Oh yeah, and this the just the location of it was a little bit. It made it so that the pedal, if you're using a flat board, it didn't have sort of a natural exit. And I remember to get that exit, I usually would turn them upside down so that you could get the IEC kind of at least pushing
Going up
off,
the left side.
onto one side of the pedal board. And so I think if you see, like, there's a rig rundown with John Schofield's rig from, like, I don't know, 10 years ago or more than that. And you can see the pedal board on there, and you can see that the Cioks is upside down.
My gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I first really started, like I was doing setups for myself, obviously, with my Voodoo Lab and the T-Rex and whatever other power supply I could afford at the time. I think I ended up getting a Pedal Power 2 or a Mondo or something. But I remember really starting in the building so many boards that I built were, there are a lot of church board players, and they were all getting the gig rig stuff, the gig rig power, because of like Jeffrey Cundy, and I can't remember if Nigel had that system. Like, I don't
Gig
know if
rig
you
system. I
remember.
don't think we
Yeah.
used it for him.
Okay, and
I could be wrong though. It's been a while.
Michael Guy Chislett, like those guys that you built all those boards for, I think some of them had that same variation. So there were so many boards that would come through with those things, and it got to a point to where so many like boards, it was like, man, I get the system, I get the idea, but for the, for a little bit, more affordable cost, you could get this all in one unit, and it
The
slowly
gig rig
shifted.
systems, man, they're expensive.
They
Like if you
get
price
they
them
get
out,
so. I have like this. I have this from an Andy Timmons build. Just the distributor.
Yeah, which is literally a daisy chain in a box.
It's just a
that's
daisy
solderless.
chain. And it was like
solderless daisy chain.
$70, I think, or whatever. And I know that they've come out with newer isolated, like their ISO version. But they're bigger now. But it's the same thing. They're still daisied, and then you'd have to get the Time Lord or the Even Flow to just power a timeline or an H9 or something. And it just started at. It was like, I see guys on Reverb with these trying to sell off like a whole lot of them. It's like $800, and I'm
Easy.
like,
$800 is a bargain for somebody.
$800. $800 gets me so
I don't
many
get
DC7s right now.
I still don't get it. We did that power supply like rank order video that I did, I don't know, a month or two ago. So like, people, what about this? And I was like, it's not even like a self-contained thing. Like to me, it seems like such a fringe use case, and this is not shade on Dan. I like Dan. I think that they have an amazing YouTube channel, and I think that his products, like, I think that they are thought out. This is not one of them that I like. That and the solderless cables are my two biggest disagreements with him. And I think that the thing is that this supply could be its own thing. They just don't want it to be. And I think he does have one now that is like a singular
Gen X
supply,
14.
but it still uses these clip-on cables.
Solderless. Yep.
Yeah.
But it is like clip-on, like the way that, I don't know, you use you do like a home theater system or speaker system. It's got these like, it's just, I just don't get it.
Things.
I just don't get.
Sorry, you go.
Yeah, it's just astonishing. Sorry, go ahead, Grant.
It's been a long time since I've used one of those, but I remember, and maybe they've fixed this since then, so I hope that's the case. But we would be installing these DC cables into these solderless things. You push the clip down, wouldn't quite grab well enough, so you undo the clip and pull it back out, but then it takes that plastic jacket off and leaves it inside of that unit. So now you're getting these things in there. You're trying to pop the thing out, get the plastic back out, pop it back down, try and get the connection again. Like it was so finicky.
No, it's the same thing.
But it's switch mode, like you said, but only from the main brick. And so then the flow-on effect is that the isolator?
Isolator,
the 4 output isolated outputs. The specs on that are not amazing as far as current output. And so you're basically getting less specs for a lot more money, and the isolation on the isolator is DC to DC, which is nothing compared to AC to DC. You can't get the same kind of isolation noise floor when you're doing DC to DC conversion. And there's there's a lot with it that I just price and everything. I just couldn't figure out why you would do that when you could get something that was had better specs for all in one unit. Yeah.
Same.
I just had to bring that up because I remember when that came out, it was influential. Like it was, a lot of people wanted it for their boards. And yeah, so I mean, it's worth mentioning.
It was a handy system to have, especially if you had such a tight space board and you needed to hide stuff.
They were tiny.
They're very tiny. I will say that it's been very convenient. I have used some of these distributors and isolators on a little 18.7 board with a one spot, and it's done the job. Obviously, it hates anything that needs a lot of current draw. Like you'll find out really quickly when you have a high pitch ringing and you find out that it doesn't supply it correctly. But yeah, no, it definitely came in handy, I think, for some stuff. But I think, you just had little, there's plus and minuses to it.
Yeah. Well, I think again, just by consequence of the expense and sort of like, but also like, it just feels very fragile when you compare it to pretty much anything else in the field. I use the board that you can see if you're watching behind me. That has a gig rig quartermaster. There's one on the floor that also has it.
Beautiful.
I think
Those are
that they
great.
have products that are great. This is not the one that I would recommend. I'm not saying that it can't work the way that it says. I believe that it does. I think the solderless thing is a deal breaker for me. The expansion kits are a deal breaker. Like, it's just, you could never say that it's going to be as robust as any fill in the blank any other extension. Zuma, Cioks 4, Cioks 8, like it just fill in the blank. X4 Voodoo Labs, X8 Voodoo Labs. They're just never. They have a self-contained metal unit now. It is slightly bigger. That is true. But when you see the conditions that some of these pedal boards go through, it's like, I don't want to leave any of that stuff to chance and have like a fully open and exposed like power supply in essence that's taking care of that. It just doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, moving on to the what we call the next evolution, so the True Tone CS12 and the Zuma and Ojai. I thought that would represented a pretty seismic shift in power supplies again, because True Tone was doing hybrid where you had AC, switchable AC on one side. That was to address sort of the M9 community, which had really taken root, especially in Nashville where they're based, and then gave you 12 outputs that were ranging in voltage from 9, 12, and 18 volts. And you had high current options available, and it was roughly the size of a pedal power Mondo, maybe a little smaller, but really did a lot of stuff voltage wise. I thought that was a really, really cool supply for the time. I remember using those a ton. Also the CS7, they're kind of smaller version of it that didn't have any AC options. And then I remember the Strymon came out, and that also was great. I just remember like picking it up and being like, falling back, like expecting it to be a weight that was kind of more commensurate with what had been out at that point. And that was really groundbreaking too. And I used a ton of those. The only issue I ever had with the Strymon supplies was not how they were designed electrically. It was the mechanical design kind of sucked, and I thought was like a little too underbuilt for what it was. And I think all of us have experienced the screws rattling loose or not being long enough or having enough threads on the machine screws that connect it together. I've also had issues with the machine screws internally that they use for those standoffs, or those would rattle apart, and then you'd kind of have like, screws rattling around. I've also had the IEC completely, unscrew itself and just have that, hanging loose. But other than that, they were, very quiet and lightweight, and were really, really, I think, set the tone for sort of the next wave of power supplies that we see now. What do you guys think?
Yeah, big shift. And I mean, I'm trying to look up a couple things here as you're chatting, but the CS12, in the back of my mind, it's a linear supply, but it's a switch mode input with linear DC outputs, correct? Is that what you were saying earlier?
Well, no, that the AC side is still linear. So okay. that part is using, that would be like a standard pedal power AC in essence, but just one output.
Yep.
And so you just have your 9 volt, I think it's 9 volt, or is it switchable between 9 and 12? I forget, but I think it's like 8 or 900 milliamp 9 volt AC, as I recall. Mm-hmm. I guess
it's 800.
800.
Yep.
Yeah. 9 volt AC. So let's call it 12 volt DC. And that there was nothing else like that, where Cioks kind of had gone that direction, where they had a mix of AC DC.
The AC rider for one.
But it was all linear. Whereas this, all the DC side is all switch mode. And then the AC side was...
AI is wrong then.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, because I just saw, like, when I see the size of the CS12, like, oh, it's linear. Like, it's gigantic.
Yeah, and you see that there's a little
side.
slider switch too, but that only applies to the AC side. I don't
Gotcha.
think it applies to the DC side, if I'm not mistaken.
I'd be curious to look into it. But yeah, those were awesome when those came out. Starting to get way better specs in there, and but I think when the Zuma came out, like a lot of the stuff Strymon does, yeah, John, I agree. AI is not something I trust often. When the Zuma came out, it was such a like, oh, this is a game changer for pedal boards. Like that is all anyone wanted was a Zuma on their pedal board for as far as power went. And just to see, I still remember it being, it's 500 milliamps on every outlet. Like that was such a huge thing because I was waiting to see 500, 100, 100, like you would on a linear supply, you know, but it just opened everything up to, we can plug anything into anywhere. We can just build the board how it needs to be built rather than trying to plan out every individual power tap. Like it was a big shift. And now we've obviously gone even beyond that, but the Zuma was I remember that being a big deal.
And I think while all that was coming out is when you also had, like, you know, probably to their chagrin, the Walrus was Phoenix or whatever it was called.
And the Atos, is that what it was?
And that kind of came out, like, I think right before there was this huge shift in sort of like the power supply ecosystem, and that was sort of, you know, obsolete in a way, almost at the moment that it came out, or didn't have a lot of time on its own. But boy, the Strymon stuff, I remember, like, other than the mechanical stuff, and that was pretty easy to resolve. I remember just the first thing that we would do when we would get them is we just install longer screws, and we put lock washers on the IECs and kind of make sure that everything was really, you know, Loctite on all of the screws that were connecting all the daughter boards and all that stuff and the standoffs, and it was fine. But you just had to know that going. I remember the first guy that I ever saw with one that was really abused because of that was Corey Wong. Had brought me a board. He was on tour. I think this is even before he was really solo. He was with Wolfpack, and they used to come through Berkeley a lot because Jack at the time was either living in Berkeley or I know he lived there for a time, but I think he was living in Berkeley, and I remember just tuning this thing up, and I remember just like having to like fish in to, you know, pull the IEC out, you know, from the inside, and there's like all these screws like rattling around. It was like a little maraca.
Oh my gosh. Well, but I think that's one thing a lot of people forget about with power supplies and stuff, and even foot switches and stuff, is like that stuff is prone to come loose. I think companies, to an extent, you know, they put those extra locking washers, they do, but like if you're I have a couple of them. I have a couple of clients that are like this. Like Andy Timms is one of them. Where, like, you know, stuff just comes loose. Stuff rattles. Stuff gets dirty. And I tell people all the time, like, man, as you know, you may practice every single day. You know, you may be gigging all the time, but you have to take at least 20 minutes sometimes, at least once a month. Sit down, spray off your board, borrow your neighbor's leaf blower if you have to, spray it out, like clean off the dust, like get some screws, do some Loctite, tighten down all the foot switches. There's a company called Love My Switches. I get a lot of my stuff from. They have stuff like this that do like all the different size, like, and it's deep enough. Yeah, so you can do like you can put it on the foot switches, but it's like that kind of stuff. And I get people all the time. They're like, "Oh man, like this power supply sucks." And I'm like, "Why?" It's like, "Well, the screws came off." I'm like, "Yes, the screws could be longer, Strymon. They could be longer in general, but like, especially because they are very short on the Ojais and stuff." But I'm like, but sometimes you just kind of have to go through them and do a once over. It's like a tune up. So, I definitely. Yes, it used to be called that. I wasn't going to refer to it, but yes, that's
Brian got called out last week for his language, and so he's trying to really temper it today.
I'm trying to
now
turn
with the
over
new baby
leaf
on the way.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm setting
now
a
that
new...
Switches Omilion is on the way.
I'm just trying to juggle my children doing this 6-7 thing that
Yep, me
everyone
too.
in their school is doing,
Me
and I'm like,
too.
either you get it or you don't, and I don't get it. So
Yep.
it's just,
Apparently,
but
it's a sports basketball reference of which I'm already out of the running to understand it just on that alone.
I don't watch
Which is
basketball. It's the
crazy
one
because
sport I
Branch
don't
is the
like.
tallest of the chairmen. You may not be able to
You
tell
are.
from
Yeah.
sitting down.
But
You-
also
well-
the most awkward. So you throw me a basketball, I'll break my glasses, and then I'll
But
try
you
and catch
literally,
it after that.
you don't even have to dunk. You just go.
Yeah, I wish I was that tall.
No, I think that's that. Yeah, so like that company has some really great stuff, but I think that's there are little things like that companies could do. I actually have. I don't ever recommend using it. I have the red bottle, which I never use.
What's the red bottle for us
it's-
non-Americans?
It's the Loctite. It's the
Ah.
red one, so it's the severe or they are high strength, which I have one I put on and I still can't get it off. So
Oh,
it's
no.
just it's completely stripped out the screw. So
Does
I
its
don't
job
recommend
too
it.
well.
Yeah. So I recommend like the blue bottle is really great. But yeah, no, that kind of stuff. I just think it comes in handy, and yes, people could do some longer screws. But I think on the Strymons though, Mason, because you said, can you swap out the shorter screws, say like on the
Yeah.
sides for longer ones, and it goes through? Okay, it doesn't hit the board. 'Cause I know sometimes
you couldn't
that's an
use
issue.
you couldn't use an inch long, but I think right
Yeah.
now, I think as it stands, there is like 1 or 2 threads that actually go through the PEM nuts. And it's less of an issue on the smaller supplies because there's not as much mass.
Big ones.
And so they can get away with slightly smaller ones. But also because of the sheet metal bend and the radius of the top of the Zuma, there's more metal. And sometimes, depending on how they bent it, you can actually see that some of them have a little bit more of a gap in the middle where the top of the clamshell meets the base, because there's no flange on the top. The top is rounded and has those radius corners, and so sometimes you'll get more of a bowing on the top. So if there is movement and stuff like that, especially if there's like a pedal on top of it, which sometimes people will do, it creates sort of this trampoline effect, which then moves the screws, and then the screws come out.
Yeah.
And so basically what I think you need is something that is, I can't remember what size they're currently, but I think it's like an 1/8 inch or something like that, or maybe even a 1/16. So just going up to slightly longer, it's not going to hit anything inside for the PCB. It's just going to give you a few more screws to deal with, or a few more threads to have just some more security in there. And then the IEC thing is pretty easy. You can use much longer screws because you have plenty of clearance in there because of just the depth of the IEC, and then you can use some nice lock nuts on the inside, and it's grabbing the plastic, so it's pretty robust.
It's all about the nuts.
Yeah.
Nice.
But anyway, that's what I've done, and I think that I think other than that, they're great supplies. I have nothing excuse me, bad to say about the design of the electrical side of things. I think it's one of the best ones out there. And I think it would be right back in the running as the best if they just switched it so that every output had the variable voltage. It would honestly, that would be the easiest fix that they could do to what they already have, and then there would be really it would take the wind out of the sails of the Cioks, argument.
It really would. It really would.
So let's break for a second to talk about some sponsors that make this podcast possible every single week. By supporting them, you are in turn supporting us. And strangely enough, many of the sponsors that you're going to hear mentioned in just a moment actually sell pretty much every power supply that we're going to talk about today. So that would be a great resource if you're in the market for power supplies to check out what their offerings are. And equally, our friends at Bestronix, who you'll hear about in a second, they sell all those accessories that you're going to need, from 2.1 millimeter barrels to RCAs, whatever you're going to do to customize your pedalboard power supply to get everything to length. They're going to be the ones to do it. So let's hear from them, then we'll be right back in just a minute. We will get right back to the episode, but before we do, I want to tell you about one of the sponsors that makes this podcast possible every single week. It is our friends over at the Guitar Sanctuary in McKinney, Texas. Now, not only do they have one of the premier guitar stores in all of Texas, but they also have an amazing website where you're able to get practically anything that you hear us talking about during any Chairman of the Boards episode, whether it's boutique guitars, amps, pedals, or more mainstream brands. They have it all there, and they have the service and staff to make it happen. So head over to our friends over at the Guitar Sanctuary, guitarsanctuary.com. Tell them the Chairman sent you.
I want to talk about Neural DSP as one of our sponsors. Neural DSP is one of the leading companies in audio plugins as well as modelers on the market. They have units like the Quad Cortex as well as the Nano Cortex and additional plugins that can be utilized on your computer as well as on the Quad Cortex to meet your musician needs. Last is going to be Mantra that they recently released, which is an amazing vocal tool. If you're not sure if Mantra is right for you, you can utilize their 14-day free trial to test it out. And if you like it, you're welcome to buy it. You can also save a little money by using our code CHAIRMEN to save 30% off on all plugins. If the plugin you want is a brand new plugin, this will not apply as the plugin has to be over 90 days old. So head on over to neurodsp.com, check out all the great offerings that they have for you. Save a little money, get better tone, and enjoy playing your gigs worry-free.
If you're listening to this episode halfway through building your pedal board, you need to check out Bestronics, also known as BTPA. This is the place to go to get all of the remaining plugs, jacks, cable, maybe even patch bays or looms to help you finish building your rig and building it the right way the first time. Brad at Bestronics is here to help you guys find the right parts for your unique pedal board and to also get you these parts at a discount. Use the code DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS, to get 10% off your order at btpa.com. Tell them the Chairman sent you.
All right. Thank you for everybody for hanging in there. Definitely some good stuff from our friends over at the Guitar Sanctuary, Bestronics, and Neural DSP. And if you're listening to us right now, you are hearing the Mantra plugin at this very moment on the listening side. So if any of you are interested in that, definitely check it out. Very good if you're doing podcast edits, etc. So let's maybe spend our remaining time together today talking about today's power supplies and maybe kind of how those have evolved to sort of, again, enhance the offerings out there to the player. We've got subsequently the Cioks offerings, DC7, Cioks 4, Cioks 8, Cioks Soul, Crux. We've got Walrus Audio, Canvas supplies, and all the different variations, including the high power versions. What else am I missing here? We already kind of touched on the Gig Rig some, but they have their kind of newest generation of power supply out that's still kind of ostensibly the same thing. What else am I missing?
Did you say the Fender one? Did you say the Fender
one?
one?
No, I didn't. The Fender Engine Room. Yep, that's another one. What else?
You said the Walrus.
I guess Dunlop has their, Dunlop
Yeah.
MXR has their kind of updated versions of the isolated bricks and expansion power supplies. Any others that
Friedman.
Yep, Friedman has their power supply.
I always say Friedman.
And the Friedman one is kind of what is it? The 10? I can't remember the
Power
number,
Bay.
Power Bay. That looks and has a very similar feature set to a Zuma.
Yes, and I was also actually going to say that there's some similarities with even the what's it called, the G Lab. I know that Dave was a big fan of the G Lab because I think that there's similarly to the G Lab only does 9 volts, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they have one that's called the Power Grid 10 as well. It's all 10 9 volts for Friedman.
I think that is the only one that they have. Do they have another one? Oh, Mono. That's another one that's out there.
Mono, yeah.
Yep. And then True Tone has a new offering that they've done that sort of is their update to the CS12 that they have, that these are kind of no AC power. These are all strictly switch mode supplies. And Voodoo Lab also has the Pedal Power 3, Pedal Power 3 Plus, X4, X8. So those are also additional offerings that are out there. So in terms of the field that's out there now, we talked a little bit about Cioks, I think, already. I think everybody's clear that we like those. We've talked about the Zumas. What do you guys think about the Fender stuff? Have you had much experience?
I've had a little experience. I will say, like, if say you split one of the power jacks off, you try to do like a Y cable, maybe you're doing like to a tuner into like a junction box or something, low milliamps.
Yeah, don't do that though, because you got a digital tuner.
Yeah, well, like if the digital tuner's not in the signal chain, like if it's off of like the output of a junction box tuner,
you can still get intermodulation between it just from DC.
But they're like, or something that you're splitting. I'm in the past I've had Fender. If it even gets close to the max milliamps, like the whole socket shuts off. Like, which I guess
like
could
the
be,
light just goes out.
Yeah, it just goes out. It's almost like it's a dead cable. So then, like, I had to spend a bunch of time trying to figure out, like, I was like, okay, is this a dead cable? And I was like, oh no, it draws way more than I needed. That's why I got that little milliamp tester one spot thing to help show my stuff. But I don't know. I always just thought it was really interesting. It was too Strymon-esque for me. Just like the look of it. The bend
very
of it
similar.
Was almost identical. It was very close.
I think that their mechanical is better than Strymon, though. Just going to go out on a limb and say that.
Well, and I wish they did the big version, and then their smaller version, they went like they changed it from, if they would have just done their big version, just cut it in half. Obviously, it would have looked more like a Zuma, or whatever. But they completely went sideways and did 5 outputs, but turned the enclosure almost. It looks like a 2 notes, like the cap.
Oh yeah.
Like it was like it was just a weird orientation. I did a couple boards with Seal with those, and it was all we were always just kind of like, it's just like a funky orientation trying to fit this on there, and the IC was on the back and the plugs are on the front, but the enclosure's really deep, so it ended up becoming. I have yet to have like really a single one of those things. Like it's just especially with Cioks and the Strymon stuff, like their big version, the engine, whatever, level 12 or whatever.
Level 12, and then there's an 8 and the 5.
Yeah, I mean the level 12 is Mondo size. It's
big.
It's hefty.
I do like, though, a couple things that they have that, like the Zuma as an example does not, is the courtesy outlet, the mains outlet. Yeah. That's really handy in certain circumstances, and I love on a power supply, and these guys are not the only ones, but I love when USB is added in, especially these days. There's a lot of times we're having a USB outlet for your phone, iPad. Certain pedals can be powered by USB or bus powered. I do like it. So I don't dislike the power supplies, but they are big for what they do.
Yeah.
I think nowadays you can possibly get smaller enclosures going, and I think that's something that when you're working with a tight layout or fitting things under a pedal board, it makes it tricky to work with these. And I would definitely opt for a thinner power supply in a lot of different contexts.
Yeah. These are not really the low profile that you can mount underneath. I think that some of those Dunlops that we mentioned, those now are able to do that. Some of the canvas supplies are able to do that. Certainly the Cioks. Some of the Strymon stuff can do it. I think the problem, though, that we've all spoken about in the past with a lot of these extension supplies or miniature profile supplies, with the exception to the Cioks, which has the mains built in, or I guess the Strymon, was it R30 that has the mains built in? R300 has the mains built in.
Yeah.
The power supply brick, which you need to use to adapt the AC to DC, are often larger profiles than the supplies themselves. So any space savings that you've achieved by way of, let's say, using a Walrus audio canvas is now undone by the fact that you have a larger height on the brick than you do the height of the supply. And to me, that seems so counterproductive for all of the effort that's gone into trying to keep these supplies small. And so I have struggled with that conundrum, and it has been consequential in several recent rig builds that I've done, where especially on stuff where you're going to be mounting power supplies underneath, and you kind of have that excuse me, approximately 1 inch height to contend with. These push it over the edge every time. And so they end up having to be put on top. And again, that idea that you're burying the supply and sort of eliminating that surface area now has to become a consideration again because of that fact. And so I would say to anybody that's listening that is associated with those camps, that needs to be the X factor when you are deciding on which brick to go with. And most of these guys, I do not think, I could be wrong, I do not think are designing the brick from scratch. I believe that they are picking from bricks that already are out there that work for their application and then are using those. And so there's not, and I know that that's a hugely expensive part of it. And I think that that's also, again, like with G-Lab, you can skirt some licensing things if there's already something in existence that has met that requirement already and doesn't require you to then go and have it, certified through Underwriters Lab and all these other procedures that are required to start dealing with AC, because there's much more liability in that. So in any case, it's a challenge, and I feel like I don't like it when I see that. It's always just like, God, man, now like we have to think about this thing. And Mono, I think, falls into that boat. I think it's the same sort of style of thing. Walrus, I think, falls into that boat.
I think the tricky thing with all this as well is that you won't see this in any of the marketing. And that's the part where like, oh, it's a little,
and it looks like that's
it
looks like everything you need is right there.
Yeah.
And nobody or nobody should, they could, I guess. You probably don't want to have that thing hanging loose, off the board, and having the main connection point for all of your power be in this 2.1 millimeter barrel input, which is not that robust,
for the EIAJ plug, right? Which is still it's like a 2.1.
Yeah, it is very, very risky to do that. And also MXR, same problem.
So at least heed the warning. Ask for specs on the power brick before you plan out your board.
Yeah.
And you'll have a pretty good idea. This is where Creation does a pretty good job with adding some pretty high extension feet. But the downside is, like if you need to put it under an arrow or something like that, but the downside to that is you're going to get this flat board or hybrid flat board that you've now bought that is now getting quite high off the ground just to fit this power supply underneath with the brick. And that's where Cioks really stands out.
I found one. I'm not trying to cut you off, I promise. I found one workaround with the arrow stuff.
Oh, tell me.
If you do extension feet on the back side, but don't do as high of extension on the front side, you can get a little bit of a slant.
I like that.
Putting that on the back side, so it doesn't feel like you're stepping on a curb. Like you're not stepping up that high.
You're creating an angled board. I've never thought to do that, and now I feel a little bit dumb for not thinking about that. Very well done, Brian. That's awesome.
Hey, it's the same thing. You still you can't get away with putting I would put the power supply, because it is obviously slimmer than the brick. You could still put it on the lower front side, but that back side, you create a little bit more space. You can put the brick, you could put a MIDI box 4, you could put a Goodwood Audio Edition. There's plenty of stuff on that back side that you can still put to accommodate it. I think running the brick off on the side is asking for trouble. It's I
would not do that.
It's one of those things
before I do that.
It almost makes me go, if you're going to run it off on the side like that, the concept you guys used to use where you had the which for the longest time I can never understood how you did it until I started tinkering into it myself. How you would run the gig rig generator down like an XLR line into a board and
Yeah, that was
convert
a
it
bad
back
idea.
in. Well, for the longest time, I was like, how are they doing this? This seems so smart. And you're like, yeah, we don't do that anymore. And I started like, oh, yeah, like this makes more sense. I feel like the only way you could ever run a brick off the side is if you did like cut the end and wire it to a more concrete jack, kind of like how Oxbox, how the Oxbox power in
Well, you could
is like
use
an
you
XLR
could use
jack.
anything,
Yeah.
on the DC side. You could
Yeah.
use anything with, you could use a guitar plug. You got to.
Yeah, exactly. You
You
imagine
could,
plugging
or
into
you could
that.
you
No
could
power.
use. I guess you could use like a speak-on or something. I guess as long as it could
Yeah.
handle the voltage or anything that just had two,
Yeah.
that could handle the spec of the voltage and current.
Yeah.
Yeah. The reason we stopped doing that is there's a relationship, an inverse relationship between the amount of current being pulled through the DC line. The more current you're pulling, the more the voltage drops off, times by the length of the cable in feet. And so the longer the cable, the more current, the less voltage you get at the board. And so for small boards, low current stuff, it was fine, really.
Yeah.
You'd lose like 0.2 volts. But we did some big boards, like, why isn't this thing powering up? And that was it. So
Mm-hmm.
that was short-lived.
Yeah.
And it just meant we had to use things like Cioks power or Strymon Zuma.
But that could
or,
be
you know,
that could be addressed though with other things like the thickness. If you're talking about cable resistance, voltage, and stuff like that.
we used thick cable, but as soon as we got up to like 20 feet on a big board, it wouldn't power
Mhm.
up anymore. And
Yeah.
because we were using a mains cable for that, we were running DC down's mains cable. It still wasn't thick enough gauge. Yeah, but yeah, I see what you mean for sure. So don't do
Yeah.
that. In short, don't do it.
Yeah, I remember when you did that, and I would say like I feel like that would be the only way you could even run a brick off is if you did that, converted it to like a 2-pin XLR or something, to where you're plugging in that every single day. Like if you're unplugging and plugging in the I'm always gonna screw it up. The EIAJ,
Oh yeah, EIAJ.
whatever
We need a
EFGAJ, whatever it's
shorthand
called.
name for that.
What's called the EJ? We'll just EJ, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just gonna
There you go.
name it something like that. But like if you're gonna plug in that socket, as a lot of people will know, that these sockets are not durable. They're plastic and they're very easily breakable. So yeah, I definitely don't. I think there are ways you could work around it by like if you really had to put it on top of a flat board. I've done it with I got like a pedal riser, fixed pedal boards. I think Mason, you have some pedal risers, or I've seen people do 3D printed risers where like you can put the brick in this riser and then have something on top of it. I've had those in the past before. I had to get creative with Andy's board because the brick was in one spot and then his Gen X14 was in a completely different spot under like a bridge or something. And I feel like that's really the only place you can like, otherwise it just, yeah, it gets real tricky. And then you're just, it's such a questionable thing is that you're going to unplug that every gig. Like I would never do that.
Yeah. Well, maybe let's spend just a couple minutes here before we finish today just going through some of the commentary that's come in over the last week in the Facebook group. And again, if you are interested in joining the Facebook group, it'll be linked in the description. And it is a good group of pretty much 1,000 strong here of pedalboard enthusiasts and continues to grow every single week. One of them was about, actually, strangely enough, a True Tone XP8, one of the newer offerings from True Tone. It says, just bought a True Tone XP8. I want to fasten it to the underside of my fix pedalboard riser. Any suggestions on the best low-profile mounting solution? I would just use dual lock, or I just dual lock it, but I will have to fit pedals underneath. Well, if he doesn't want to, if I guess he's saying that if he dual locks it, that it would be too high at that point.
I mean, if you need a no height solution,
you could just hard
you
mount
zip
it.
tie. You could bolt it into the frame. What did he say? The board type he's using?
He just said it was a fixed pedalboard riser. But
Oh,
I'm just
okay, so
trying
that's
to
a
look.
thin sheet of aluminum.
Yeah, it's
You
pretty
could,
thin. I'm
you
just
could
trying to
do
look
that.
at how many how many holes there are. Like this looks like I only see one mounting hole on the front of this supply and one mounting hole at the back.
And there's none.
So it
on
looks
the
like there's
other-
only
on the bottom.
two mounting holes. Is this right?
You can also use, and this stuff is frustratingly strong, kind of like dual lock. You don't want to overdo it. Is you could use this kind of rubber-based, double-sided, either foam. I use for PCBs on custom shop boxes. It's like a clear rubber adhesive, and it's a double-sided tape type thing, but it's probably 2 millimeters thick, and that stuff is incredibly strong. And you could do that. That would be probably a third or a quarter the height of dual lock. The two pieces of dual lock mounted. That stuff's pretty good. If you couldn't hard mount it with bolts, which is the Omilion method, which I really love. Then I would probably find a double-sided foam type rubber tape.
Yeah, I mean, I would have said the bolting option. I think you could.
This one doesn't look like it can be bolted like the old ones can.
Not at all.
Because if I were going to do it, the only way I think you could reasonably do it, there's only one machine screw at the top.
It's
But
Benjamin,
there are two on
right?
the sides. There are two on the sides, and I think if you got a long enough L bracket that you could do like what people used to do in the old school pedal trains, where they would use the L bracket, they would attach it to the side, and basically get a longer machine screw and have that feed through the L bracket, probably a washer, because probably to get an L bracket that's going to clear this, it's going to be a larger hole diameter than this. So getting some sort of washer, and then feeding that through, and then mounting the L bracket up through the riser with machine screws. And I think two would be fine if you just did one on each side of the power supply. I don't think you'd need more than that.
Does BTPA do any folded aluminum? Would they make custom brackets?
Maybe.
So I was gonna say, so BTPA, I'm taking one out of Brad's book because I see him do this all the time. They use a very thin folded. You can actually go to Home Depot and get it. It's like L channel. It probably comes in a long strip, like an extrusion, but it's like 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. You get a small piece of that, or you get that cut, and then because looking at this on the sides, it's this one, right? It's this one spot one that we're talking about, the Pro.
Yeah, you basically have two on the sides and one on the back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could get two. You could cut two pieces, or find someone that does like a bracket or whatever. But the bracket's gonna have to go all the way across the side. I would probably do some kind of double side tape, like we were talking about, sticking it to it and then threading the bolt through the enclosure or whatever, so that there's no like tip like wobble or anything. That seems like the best option.
And you could even do you can use a hacksaw, or you could use some sort of metal saw to be able to cut the extrusion down, because it's pretty light metal. It's not going to be hard for you to get through cleanly if you don't have somebody that can cut it for you, or you can't cut it yourself.
Exactly.
One thing I would question, I don't know the full context of this build, but this is a switch mode supply, no IEC. So I assume there's a brick somewhere for this.
There is a brick, it's one of the big ones.
And what I would question is, I assume he wants to mount it under the riser so he can power what's up top above the riser.
Probably.
I would instead say, just put this underneath one of those pedals below, and then just run the DC cables at the top, and kind of let gravity help you out here a little bit more with it, if that'll fit.
Yeah.
I would probably try and do that instead.
Can I share this here? I actually found, crazy enough, Lowe's has this 0.5 inch. It's a L bracket, but on one, I can't share it. I can try to put it in the chat.
Let me see if this will work. Hold on. Go ahead, Brian. Try that now.
Oh, the share? Oh, the screen?
That's right.
Oh, sick.
Yes.
Okay.
So watch us on YouTube if you want to see what Brian's doing here.
Can you see it?
Oh no, it didn't show.
Not
you.
working.
No worries, it's fine.
But this is just another form of an L bracket.
It's a little bracket, yeah. But what I'm saying is, this one side, it's a fixed hole, but the
right,
other
and the
side
other one
it's
you can move
slotted.
it. You can, yeah.
So you have a little bit more. Obviously, I would suggest going from the reset screw to a pan head screw or whatever, so it's not funky. But that I think would allow you to meet that height that it looks like the photos giving. I would probably suggest that.
And I bet like on McMaster or something like that, you could probably see a bunch of variations of that with different heights so that you could really adjust it into whatever you needed.
Yeah.
Next question says, does anyone have an issue with their HX Stomp 5-pin MIDI? I'm trying to connect my Morningstar MC8 and it's not working. I checked global settings and it's all set up right. I did a factory reset and even did use another cable to connect to my laptop to make sure that the root cause was my HX Stomp. The HX exit wasn't connecting, which confirmed to me that it was the HX Stomp. The USB Type B port works, but the rest does not work. Any insights there for the...
So the MIDI out on the HX Stomp is not passing messages? Is that essentially the summary?
Yes. It says he's trying to connect it to his MC8, and it's not working.
Interesting. The first thing I would do, and then Brian, you can... you've got more experience than I do on this. I would probably first set everything to Omni so that channels are no longer an issue. And then I would double check the cable. And since I assume you're not using an Omni port for the MC6, MC8, whatever the Morningstar controller was. If you're using 5-pin, you aren't dealing with MIDI Type A, Type B, so that's not a factor. So it's just making sure your cable works, which it sounds like you're trying to figure out as well, which is great. But those are really the only two things that should come into play is cable and MIDI channel. If the signal chain is your MIDI controller into your HX Stomp, nothing else in between. Those are really the main two things that could go wrong here. Line 6 is a little bit harder to program for MIDI. Like there's a bit more to it. So I would just try and do the simplest possible MIDI message you could, a PC message or something like that. But that's where my brain goes for those two issues. Factory reset's a good call, but cable and MIDI channel are really the main ones.
Yeah, it depends if it's the Pro or the original one. I've actually, weirdly enough, had issues with the DIN out of the MC8 Pro before on a couple units. MIDI cable tested fine. It was going just strictly to a single unit, and it was being really funky. I would probably say the first thing is you could try doing the DIN, or I've even done the Omni ports and just set it to type to it's like just the standard MIDI out. I think it's set to, and you could do a 1/4 inch to a DIN cable. That's a workaround. Obviously, it's not like the best workaround or whatever, but yeah, a big thing would be setting it to Omni. Honestly, getting it to change at all. If you can get it to change at all, then you can go back and change it. But with the MC stuff, you got to be really careful. It's like if you don't have the switch set right, if you don't have the polarity of the switch done right, the on-off state, how the setting is, there's a lot of things that will make it not work. Another way you could try to make sure that your switch is set right is try a different MIDI device. Try a different MIDI device, a timeline or whatever the MIDI you have. If that's changing, but then this other unit is not changing, yeah, it's either could be unit related too. But yeah, that's where I would start. It's just kind of cutting out any of the what if possibilities and just kind of troubleshooting through what it could be.
The other thing I love about Morningstar, I think was brilliant for this exact issue, is their built-in MIDI monitor. So you can actually see what the Morningstar software is sending, where it's sending, and what it's sending. And it can actually tell you a lot about, like, did I just make a dumb programming error and I think I'm sending a message, but I'm not?
Yeah.
Kind of to Brian's point. And so I would set it up in the simplest way possible. One MIDI message out the 5-pin output on a press, and go to the MIDI monitor, press that switch, and see if it's actually doing what you think it should be doing.
Yep.
I think that was, as far as Morningstar goes, a brilliant move, because with
Very
other
much so.
programmers, you need a third-party app, you need an interface, you need all this, and it's a nightmare. And so I would go straight to the MIDI monitor as well.
Honestly, this is completely unrelated. I hope that Morningstar does an all-in-one unit. I would love to see them do an all-in-one, a loops and thing. I've been messing with their editor, and it was the same thing. It was the MC8 Pro, and that monitor thing was just so cool. You could see what it was sending to what, and it was just sorry, I had to say it. I was thinking about that.
It would be cool, especially with the ML10X functionality, if they made that a little less clunky with all the parallel stuff.
Oh, the parallel
just
stuff is so cool.
Built it all in there. If you didn't need to use a computer editor for that, that would be brilliant.
And they have it down so well that you can actually use their Bluetooth, the app, to do everything that you do on your desktop on your phone. And you can just Bluetooth connect to it. And it's like changing the foot switches, everything. It's cool. I was nerding out on that the other day. I was just like, this is really cool.
They're doing some cool stuff, eh?
Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, guys, thank you so much for being here today. It's always good to get a chance to chat with everybody. And thank you for all the viewers today that left a thumbs up. Again, leaving us a thumbs up, as stupid as that sounds, and I know that everybody on YouTube asks you for that, we actually mean it. That's the difference when we say that. And by way of giving us a thumbs up, that just allows the algorithm to shine favorably upon us so that the YouTube gods will then feed this podcast to more people. So if you like this podcast and you sincerely like us as much as we like you, we highly recommend that you give us a thumbs up, leave us a comment, tell us something about the evolution of power supplies that we talked about that either validated what you already knew or taught you something new about the history of the power supply and how it has morphed over time. I think for the better. Nobody's going after vintage power supplies. So I think that this is one thing that we are advancing in our industry and not looking backwards to find new product ideas. So thank you for being here. Join the Facebook group. Leave us a review on Spotify, Apple, wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. We will see you all next week, Monday, 12 noon Pacific time zone. See you guys.
Bye, guys.